The air tasted of rust and regret. When the transport truck groaned to a halt, its brakes screaming like something dying, Anna Petrova was the last one to move. The other candidates scrambled out, their boots hitting the baked Nevada dirt with the eager thud of ambition. Anna remained seated, a ghost in a uniform that seemed to hang on a memory rather than a person. They stripped her to shame a coward in front of everyone, but froze in horror at the torture scars that covered her back. Finally, she swung her legs over the side and dropped down. The sun was a merciless hammer, beating down on the sprawling, dust-choked expanse of the Black Rock Special Operations Training Center, a place known only as the Crucible. It was where careers were forged in fire or shattered into dust. For Anna, it was something else entirely, a final, desperate chance to outrun a shadow. The base commander, a man with a face like a clenched fist named Colonel Thorne, stood on a platform, his voice scraping across the silence. "Welcome to the Crucible," he began, his eyes sweeping over the new arrivals, a predator assessing its prey. "Here, your past accomplishments mean nothing. Your medals, your commendations, leave them at the gate. We care about one thing, what you do when you're broken." His gaze lingered, just for a second, on Anna. "And let me be clear, we do not welcome those who drag their teammates down in the field. We do not tolerate weakness that gets good soldiers killed." A ripple of understanding went through the ranks. Every eye, it seemed, found its way to Anna. She stood motionless, her face a blank canvas, but she could feel the weight of their judgment, heavy and suffocating. The whispers had followed her for months, slithering through the barracks and briefing rooms of every base she'd been shuffled through. Anna Ghost Petrova, the sole survivor of Operation Nightfall. The official report was a sterile, bloodless document citing catastrophic intelligence failure. But the unofficial story, the one told in hushed tones over cheap beer, was far more damning. It was a story of a 5-person team ambushed, of a firefight that lasted 7 minutes, and of one soldier emerging without a scratch while 4 decorated operators were brought home in bags. The word they used was coward, a runner. Her file, she knew, was flagged with a crimson marker. It decreed that she had one last opportunity to prove her mettle. Pass the Crucible's brutal assessment and selection course, and she could remain in the service. Fail, and she would be permanently, dishonorably discharged. It wasn't a second chance. It was a public execution disguised as an evaluation. As the candidates were herded towards the barracks, the whispers became murmurs. "That's her," a broad-shouldered ranger muttered to his companion. "The ghost of Nightfall. Looks like she's already seen one," his friend snickered. Anna walked through the gauntlet of stairs, her focus narrowed to the simple, mechanical task of putting one foot in front of the other. She found her assigned bunk, a stark metal frame in a room that smelled of sweat and disinfectant. Methodically, she began to unpack her duffel bag. Her movements were precise, economical, each item folded and placed with an eerie calm. It was a ritual, a way to build a small wall of order against the chaos that clawed at the edges of her mind. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the desert sun was replaced by the suffocating darkness of a collapsed building. The scent of dust and disinfectant became the coppery tang of blood. She heard the screams, the crackle of a dying radio, the final, choked-off words of her team leader. "Anna, run." Her eyes snapped open. A young, eager-looking candidate from the next bunk over, a man named Elias Vance, was watching her. He had the sharp, analytical eyes of a tech specialist. He didn't look at her with the same open contempt as the others, but with a quiet, unnerving curiosity. "You're Petrova, right?" he asked, his voice low. Anna simply nodded, not offering a name or a handshake. "Tough break. What happened on Nightfall?" he added, a clumsy attempt at sympathy. Anna's gaze met his, and for a fleeting second, the blank canvas of her face showed a flicker of something ancient and weary. "You weren't there," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. The statement wasn't an accusation. It was a fact as cold and hard as the concrete floor beneath their feet. She turned back to her bag. The conversation terminated. Later that evening, as the last rays of sun bled across the horizon, painting the mountains in hues of bruised purple and orange. The candidates were assembled again. The true architect of their coming misery was about to make his entrance. The man who would be their judge, jury, and, for most, their executioner. The whispers spoke of him with a mixture of fear and reverence. A legend in the special operations community. A man who ate glass and spat out heroes. Sergeant Mark Voss. And as he strode into the light of the flood lamps, his shadow stretching long and menacing before him, Anna knew her trial was about to begin in earnest. Sergeant Mark Voss moved like a panther, all coiled muscle and predatory grace. He was a man carved from the very rock of the crucible, with a jaw that could cut steel and eyes the color of a winter storm. He was a walking, breathing recruitment poster, the embodiment of the warrior ethos. And when he spoke, his voice was a low growl that commanded absolute, terrified attention. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He paced before the formation, his gaze sweeping over them, dissecting each man and woman, cataloging their weaknesses. Then his eyes locked onto Anna. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Petrova, Anna, he said, the name rolling off his tongue like an accusation. Operation Nightfall. 5 operators went in. 1 came out. Tell me, candidate, what's the first principle of combat survival? The silence was absolute. The entire platoon held its breath. This was more than an introduction. It was a public indictment. Anna's eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere beyond Voss's shoulder. Never compromise the mission, Sergeant, she answered, her voice steady, a monotone that betrayed nothing. A slow, cruel smile spread across Voss's face. Wrong, he purred. The first principle is you don't leave your team behind. You fight with them. You die with them. You don't run while they're being slaughtered. The words hung in the air, a public branding. He had declared her a coward without ever using the word. He was setting the tone, not just for her, but for everyone. She was the platoon's designated pariah, the living example of everything they were not to be. Here at the Crucible, Voss continued, his voice rising slightly, addressing the entire group, but his eyes still boring into Anna. We don't just train soldiers. We forge warriors, and warriors have honor. They have integrity. They don't have ghosts in their past. Your time here will be a cleansing fire. It will burn away your weaknesses, your fears, or it will burn you to ash. Look at candidate Petrova. She's your baseline. She is the weakness we are here to eliminate. Do you understand me? Yes, Sergeant, the platoon roared back, a unified chorus of condemnation. Anna didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Inside, however, a familiar cold dread settled in her stomach. This was different. This wasn't just whispers and suspicion. This was a targeted, systematic campaign orchestrated by a man who held her future in his hands. The next day, the campaign began. During equipment issue, the quartermaster, taking his cue from Voss, accidentally gave Anna a rifle with a misaligned sight. It was a subtle act of sabotage, one she could easily be blamed for during range qualification. Elias Vance, waiting in line behind her, saw it happen. He watched as Anna, without a word of complaint, took the rifle to the side. He expected her to report it, to protest. Instead, she pulled a small, unauthorized multi-tool from her pocket and, with a series of deft, practiced movements that took less than 30 seconds, recalibrated the sight herself. Her hands were rock steady, her focus absolute. Vance's brow furrowed. The action was quiet, efficient, and deeply professional. It didn't fit the narrative of a panicked soldier who fled a firefight. It was the muscle memory of an expert. The isolation was immediate and total. In the mess hall, the tables around Anna remained empty, creating a circle of exclusion. If she sat down, others would stand up and move. The shunning was as organized as a tactical maneuver. She ate alone, her gaze fixed on her tray, chewing her food with a methodical rhythm that seemed to be her only defense. She built a fortress out of silence, but she could feel the walls closing in. The verbal jabs were constant, like 1,000 tiny cuts. "Hey, Ghost, see any of your dead friends lately?" someone would mutter as she passed. Don't stand too close to Petrova. Her bad luck might be contagious. Voss was the conductor of this orchestra of cruelty. He never missed an opportunity to single her out. During navigation course, he gave her a compass that had been deliberately demagnetized. When she still managed to find her way back using the sun and terrain association, a skill few possessed, he didn't commend her. He accused her of cheating. "You must have had a map hidden, Petrova," he sneered, tossing her pack on the ground, its contents spilling into the dust. A coward's first instinct is to find a shortcut, a way to avoid the hard path. He was twisting her competence into a flaw, reframing her resilience as a sign of deceit. It was a masterful piece of psychological warfare. He wasn't just trying to break her. He was trying to make her break herself, to make her believe the lie he was telling everyone else. One evening, Vance found himself walking behind Anna as they headed back from a grueling 10-mile ruck march. She was at the back of the formation, not because she was struggling, but because that's where she was always forced to be. He noticed she had a slight limp. "You okay?" he asked, keeping his voice down. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable in the twilight. "I'm Fina. That pack, it's sitting weird on your back," he observed. "Looks like it's rubbing you raw." Without stopping, Anna reached back, adjusted a strap, and kept walking. "It's fine," she repeated, but Vance had seen it. When she adjusted the strap, her shirt had pulled tight against her back, and for a split second he saw the ridges of what looked like old, raised scars beneath the fabric. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough to deepen the mystery. Later that night, long after lights out, Vance lay on his bunk, unable to sleep. The sounds of the barracks, snores, coughs, the groan of metal bed frames, faded into the background. He kept replaying the events of the past few days in his mind. The rifle sight, the compass, the scars. None of it added up. He'd pulled up the public report on Operation Nightfall on a secure network. It was, as Anna had said, heavily redacted. But one detail stood out. The mission's objective was a high-value target, a notorious warlord's chief interrogator known only as the Butcher. The report stated the team was eliminated before reaching the target. It was clean, simple, and Vance was beginning to suspect a complete lie. He looked across the darkened room to where Anna slept. She was perfectly still, almost unnaturally so. Not a twitch, not a sound. She wasn't sleeping. She was waiting, like a soldier on watch, deep in enemy territory, knowing the attack could come at any moment. And Vance realized with a sudden, chilling certainty that for Anna Petrova, the war had never ended. The Crucible wasn't a training ground. It was just another battlefield. The first live-fire exercise was designed to separate the contenders from the pretenders. It was a complex drill involving moving targets, shoot/no-shoot scenarios, and extreme time pressure. It was where raw, instinctual skill came to the forefront. It was where Voss expected Anna Petrova to finally, spectacularly, fall apart. He placed her in the most challenging lane, one with multiple targets appearing in rapid, unpredictable sequences. He stood behind the firing line with his clipboard and a smirk, ready to document her failure. The buzzer sounded. Anna raised her rifle, and the world seemed to slow down. What happened next was not the frantic, panicked shooting of a coward. It was the cold, economical precision of a surgeon. Pop, 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 pop. Each shot was a double tap to the chest, a single precise round to the head. She moved through the course with a fluid, predatory grace that was terrifying to behold. She didn't just hit the targets. She dismantled them. Her reloads were a blur of motion, so fast they were almost invisible. She cleared a weapon jam, one Voss's cronies had deliberately set up, in under 2 seconds without breaking her rhythm. When the smoke cleared, the results were undeniable. Anna hadn't just passed. She had set a new course record. She'd beaten the time of every other candidate. And as the rangemaster later confirmed in a hushed whisper, she had even beaten Sergeant Voss's personal best from his own time as a candidate. A stunned silence fell over the range. The other candidates stared, their mouths agape. This wasn't just competence. This was mastery. This was the kind of skill that couldn't be learned on a practice range. It was forged in the crucible of real combat. Voss walked over to her target, his face a mask of thunderous disbelief. He stared at the tight, perfect groupings of holes. He turned back to Anna, who was calmly cleaning her weapon, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. Any other instructor would have seen this as proof of elite talent. Voss saw it as an act of defiance. He saw it as a personal insult. This display of skill didn't fit his carefully constructed narrative. It was a crack in a story he was telling himself and everyone else. So he did the only thing he could. He doubled down. He strode back to the firing line, his voice dripping with venom. Well, Petrova. Impressive, he said, the word impressive sounding like a curse. It seems you're very good at shooting stationary targets when no one is shooting back. A real hero of the practice range. But let me tell you something, candidates. He turned to the others. A high score here doesn't mean a damn thing if you don't have the courage to stand your ground when it counts. A jackrabbit can run fast, but it's still a jackrabbit. Remember that. The message was clear. Her skill was meaningless, an aberration. The narrative of the coward remained unchanged. In fact, her performance made him even more determined to break her. He saw her quiet competence not as an asset, but as a silent rebellion. The escalation was swift. The training became a personal vendetta. During hand-to-hand combat drills, Voss paired Anna with the largest, most aggressive man in the platoon, a former MMA fighter. Show her what real pressure feels like, Voss instructed him with a wink. The man charged, expecting to toss the smaller woman around like a rag doll. But Anna didn't meet his force with force. She flowed around him, using his own momentum against him. With a series of precise, debilitating strikes to his nerve clusters and joints, she had him on the ground, gasping for air in under 10 seconds. She didn't gloat. She simply stepped back and resumed her ready stance. Voss's face tightened. He saw the technique. It wasn't standard military combatives. It was a brutal, efficient system designed for one purpose: incapacitation or death. It was the kind of thing taught only in the deepest, blackest corners of the special operations world. The incident solidified the divide in the platoon. Most candidates, loyal to Voss, saw Anna's skills as freakish and unsettling. They intensified their shunning. But a small, quiet minority, including Vance, began to watch her with a new kind of respect, mixed with fear. They didn't understand what they were seeing, but they knew it wasn't cowardice. Voss, however, was now consumed by a cold fury. He couldn't break her physically. He couldn't outshoot her. Her quiet resilience was a constant, infuriating challenge to his authority. He realized he had to change tactics. He couldn't just make her fail a drill. He had to engineer a situation so hopeless, so public, that her spirit would shatter completely. He needed to create a scenario where her skills were useless, where the only thing left was the ghost of Operation Nightfall. And he knew just the way to do it. The final evaluation, the red flag exercise, was approaching. It was his masterpiece of psychological torment, and he was designing a special role in it, just for her. The systematic pressure Voss applied was like water torture, a constant, relentless drip designed to erode Anna's sanity. He couldn't break her in open competition, so he began to attack her from the shadows, using the very structure of the training as his weapon. During a simulated hostage rescue mission, the teams were briefed in a darkened room, studying a complex building layout on a projected map. Voss assigned Anna the critical role of point man for her team, the first one through the door. It was a position of extreme risk and responsibility. But as the lights came up and the teams moved out, Vance, who was on the opposing team, noticed something. Voss had kept Anna's team leader back for a few extra seconds, whispering something to him. The mission began. Anna's team stormed the building. But the layout was wrong. The door she was supposed to breach led not to a hallway, as the map had shown, but to a reinforced concrete wall. It was a fatal error in the intelligence. As her team fumbled in confusion, Vance's team, positioned perfectly based on the correct layout they had secretly been given, opened fire with simulated rounds, wiping them out. In the after-action review, Voss crucified Anna. "The point man is the team's eyes and ears," he roared, his face inches from hers. You led your team into a death trap, Petrova. Your incompetence got them all killed. Does that sound familiar to you? He knew she'd been given bad intel. He had engineered it. He was recreating the conditions of Operation Nightfall. Faulty intelligence leading to a catastrophic ambush, and placing the blame squarely on her shoulders. She stood there, taking the verbal onslaught, her face pale, but her expression unbroken. She didn't defend herself. She didn't point out the discrepancy in the maps. She just absorbed it, another layer of ice forming over her soul. Vance knew what had happened. He had seen the whispered conversation. He felt a knot of disgust tighten in his stomach. This wasn't training, it was a setup. But to speak out was to invite Voss's wrath, to commit career suicide. He stayed silent, and the silence felt like a betrayal. The psychological warfare intensified. The Crucible had a notorious exercise known as the Serpent's Nest, a claustrophobic tunnel maze that candidates had to navigate in pitch darkness. It was a primal test of courage, designed to trigger deep-seated fears of being trapped. Voss knew from Anna's file that the final moments of Operation Nightfall had taken place in the rubble of a collapsed structure. He sent her in last, and once she was deep inside, he had the instructors introduce a new element, a low-frequency sound emitter that mimicked the groaning of stressed concrete and a slow drip of water, just like in the aftermath of the explosion she had survived. Inside the suffocating blackness of the tunnel, the sounds and sensations hit Anna like a physical blow. The walls seemed to press in, the air grew thick and heavy. The ghosts of her fallen comrades whispered in the dark. "Run, Anna, run." Her breathing became ragged. A panic attack, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. She pressed her forehead against the cool, damp earth, her body trembling uncontrollably. For the first time, she was close to breaking. But then, something else rose from the depths of her memory. The voice of her team leader, Sergeant Evans. Not his last, desperate command to run, but what he had taught her weeks before. "When you're in the dark, Ghost," he'd said, his voice calm and steady, "and the fear is eating you alive, you don't run. You breathe. You find one solid thing. You anchor yourself, and then you move, 1 inch at a time." She focused on the feeling of the rough earth against her skin. She regulated her breathing, counting in for 4 out for 6. The panic receded, like a tide pulling away from the shore. She anchored herself, and then she began to move, 1 inch at a time. She emerged from the tunnel an hour later, covered in mud and filth, her face streaked with tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. But she emerged. She had faced the ghost of that collapsed building, and she had not broken. Voss was waiting for her at the exit, his disappointment a palpable aura. He had expected to see a shattered wreck. Instead, he saw a survivor. The sight of her quiet, unbreakable endurance seemed to fuel his hatred into something bordering on obsession. He saw her resilience not as strength, but as a profound personal failure on his part. He had thrown his worst at her, and she was still standing. He knew then that the final exercise had to be more than just a setup. It had to be a public spectacle, a ritual of humiliation so complete, so undeniable, that she would have no choice but to disintegrate before the eyes of everyone. He would not just make her fail. He would strip her of her dignity, her identity, her very humanity. He would turn her into the ghost everyone already believed her to be. The final 72-hour field exercise, codenamed Red Flag, was the culmination of everything the Crucible represented. It was a relentless gauntlet of sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and high-stakes tactical problems. It was Voss's magnum opus, a symphony of suffering he conducted with sadistic glee. And this year, he had composed a special movement just for Anna Petrova. The scenario was a complex counterinsurgency operation in a sprawling, mock Afghan village populated by role players. The platoon's mission was to win the trust of the locals, identify a high-value target, and capture him without causing collateral damage. It was a test of nuance and restraint, not just brute force. Voss, in his role as exercise director, held all the cards. He controlled the flow of intelligence, the actions of the role players, and the timing of simulated enemy attacks. He began by assigning Anna to a 4-person reconnaissance team led by Sergeant Miller, one of Voss's most loyal acolytes. Their task was to establish a covert observation post overlooking the village. From the start, everything went wrong. The intelligence Voss provided on enemy patrol routes was deliberately falsified. The team walked directly into a simulated ambush within the first hour. During the chaotic firefight, Miller, following Voss's unspoken script, began to openly question Anna's every move. "Petrova, cover that flank," he'd yell, even when she was already doing it. "Petrova, why are you lagging? Trying to find an escape route." The constant criticism was designed to undermine her confidence and paint her as incompetent in front of the team. But Anna simply executed her duties with a quiet, unnerving efficiency. She moved with an instinctual awareness of angles and cover that repeatedly saved the team from being fully encircled. She spotted IED trigger wires the others missed. Her quiet competence was a stark contrast to Miller's loud, panicked commands. Frustrated, Voss escalated. He used his control of the exercise to create a moral dilemma. A role player, a frantic village elder, ran to their position, claiming his daughter was trapped in a building that was about to be targeted by a friendly drone strike. It was a classic test of priorities. Risk the mission to save a civilian, or hold position. Miller, eager to appear decisive, immediately dismissed the elder. "We have our orders. We don't move." Anna spoke up for the first time, her voice low but firm. "It's a lie," she said. "What did you say, Petrova?" Miller snapped. "His daughter," Anna clarified, her eyes fixed on the elder. "He's wearing a wedding band, but there's no indentation on his finger. He doesn't wear it often. He's not a village elder. He's a scout, trying to draw us out into the open." She pointed to the man's shoes. "And those are military-issue boots, not local sandals." Her observation was brilliant, a stunning piece of fieldcraft. But Miller, blinded by his loyalty to Voss and his own prejudice, couldn't accept it. "You think you know better than me, Ghost? You're just looking for an excuse not to act, an excuse to hide. We're holding position." 2 minutes later, a massive simulated explosion erupted from the direction the elder had pointed to. A second enemy team, lying in wait for them to attempt a rescue, opened up on their now exposed position. It was a perfectly executed trap, and Miller had walked right into it because he had refused to listen to the one person who saw it coming. The team was pinned down, taking heavy simulated casualties. The exercise evaluators, watching from a distance, began marking them as combat ineffective. In the chaos, Miller's composure finally cracked. He got on the radio to Voss, his voice frantic. "We're compromised. Pinned down. Petrova's hesitation got us caught." It was the lie Voss had been waiting for. He responded over the command channel, his voice cold and clear for everyone in the platoon to hear. "Roger that, Sergeant Miller. Your team is combat ineffective. All members are considered Kia, except for you, Petrova." There was a pause, pregnant with malice. "Your team is gone." Again, Voss's voice crackled over the radio, a death sentence delivered to her reputation. "You have failed to protect them. You are once again the sole survivor. The objective has not been taken. The mission is a failure because of you. Do you copy, Ghost?" Anna lay in the dust, the sound of simulated gunfire echoing in her ears. The words hit her harder than any bullet. He had done it. He had perfectly, cruelly recreated the nightmare of Operation Nightfall. He had stripped her of her team, her mission, and her honor, all in front of an audience. She keyed her radio, her hand trembling slightly. "Solid copy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the ice around her soul begin to crack. The aftermath of Red Flag was a public crucifixion. Voss assembled the entire platoon in the main courtyard, the setting sun casting long, accusatory shadows. He had Anna stand alone in the center, a solitary figure in a sea of hostile faces. The air was thick with righteous contempt. "Look at her," Voss began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He paced around Anna like a shark. "This is what failure looks like. This is the consequence of cowardice. For the second time in her career, candidate Petrova has watched her team die while she survived. Some might call that bad luck. I call it pattern. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more chilling than his roars. I've been thinking, maybe the problem isn't her spirit. Maybe it's something physical, a weakness, a defect. We're going to conduct a final inspection, a courage inspection, to make sure she isn't carrying any contraband, any hidden fears. The platoon shifted, a murmur of unease mixing with cruel anticipation. They knew this was crossing a line, but they were too intimidated by Voss to object. Sergeants, Voss barked at two hulking instructors. Strip her gear. All of it. The two men moved in. They ripped the tactical vest from her body, tossing it to the ground. Her helmet followed, then her pack. She was left in her dusty, sweat-stained fatigues, standing ramrod straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She had retreated deep inside herself, to a place where the humiliation couldn't reach her. Not enough, Voss sneered. I want to see what a coward is made of. Take off her jacket. One of the instructors hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was beyond any regulation, but a glare from Voss sent him moving again. He roughly pulled the jacket from her arms, leaving her in just a thin, dark green t-shirt. I said, Voss enunciated each word with chilling precision. I want to see her. This was the moment he had engineered. Her ultimate degradation. As the instructors reached for the hem of her t-shirt, a sound cut through the tense silence. It wasn't a human voice. It was a high-pitched, piercing siren that none of them had ever heard before. Way-ay-ay-ay. Red lights flashed across the base, bathing the courtyard in a hellish glow. A computerized voice, devoid of emotion, blared from the base-wide PA system. Code Black. Real-world intrusion. Perimeter breached at Sector Gamma. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. For a heartbeat, everyone was frozen in disbelief. Then chaos erupted. Candidates scrambled for cover. Instructors yelled conflicting orders. In the distance, the distinct chatter of automatic gunfire confirmed the horrifying truth. The Crucible was under attack. Voss, for all his bluster, was momentarily paralyzed. His carefully controlled world had just been shattered. And in that single moment of paralysis, Anna Petrova, the ghost, the coward, the broken soldier, came alive. It wasn't a gradual change. It was a switch being flipped. The vacant, 1,000-yard stare vanished, replaced by an electrifying, hyper-focused intensity. Her body, which had been rigid with suppressed trauma, became a fluid weapon. Before the two instructors beside her could even process the alarm, she moved. It was a blur of motion, an elbow strike to the throat of the first man, a precise chop to the brachial nerve of the second. They both dropped, gasping and incapacitated, without a sound. She didn't spare them a glance. She scooped up the M4 rifle from one of the fallen instructors, her hands moving with an intimacy that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. She slammed a fresh magazine home, racked the charging handle, and scanned the perimeter, all in less time than it took most people to blink. The entire courtyard had become her tactical map. She saw the lines of fire, the points of cover, the fatal funnels. She saw the panic in the candidates' eyes and the indecision in the instructors. She keyed the radio on the vest of the man she just dropped. Her voice cut through the panicked chatter, and it was a voice no one had ever heard before. It was not the flat, lifeless tone of Anna Petrova. It was the voice of commander, cold, clear, and absolute. All call signs. This is Ghost, she snapped, the old call sign falling from her lips like a prayer and a curse. Cease all transmissions. All candidates, form on me. Vance, you have comms. Relay my orders. Everyone else, find cover and wait for instructions. Move. Her voice was a thunderclap that cut through the chaos. And for the first time, the candidates of the Crucible saw the real Anna Petrova. And she was more terrifying than Sergeant Voss had ever been. The attack was professional, coordinated, and brutal. A small, heavily armed force had used the distraction of the base's shift change to breach the perimeter. Their target was clear, a visiting high-ranking general who was on site for a classified briefing. They were already inside the wire, moving toward the command center. While Voss was still trying to rally the shell-shocked instructors, Anna was already executing a counterattack. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a conductor orchestrating a symphony of violence. Vance, get a line to the armory. Tell them to secure the heavy ordnance and establish a fallback position at the main gate, she commanded, her voice never rising, yet cutting through the din of gunfire. Miller, take 3 men, lay down suppressing fire on that watchtower. Draw their attention. Go! The candidates, who moments ago had been her tormentors, now followed her orders without hesitation. Her authority was absolute, born not of rank, but of pure, undeniable competence. She moved through the chaos with a terrifying calm, her rifle speaking in short, controlled bursts. She wasn't just fighting. She was thinking, anticipating the enemy's moves 3 steps ahead. She saw the battlefield in a way no one else could. She spotted a 2-man enemy team setting up a machine gun nest that would cut off the path to the command center. I'll flank them, she told Vance. Cover me. She moved, not like a soldier, but like smoke. She flowed from cover to cover, using the shadows and chaos as her allies. As she prepared to make her final move, a stray RPG round exploded against a nearby vehicle, sending a wave of fire and shrapnel tearing through the air. Anna shoved Vance behind a concrete barrier, taking the brunt of the blast herself. She was thrown to the ground, the back of her t-shirt shredded by the flying metal fragments. She pushed herself up, ignoring the pain, and finished her assault, neutralizing the machine gun nest with 2 perfectly placed shots. The immediate threat was over. She turned back to check on Vance, and as she moved into the harsh glare of the security lights, he saw it. Everyone saw it. Her entire back, from the nape of her neck to her waist, was a horrifying tapestry of scar tissue. This wasn't the clean, pale line of a surgical scar or the jagged mark of a battlefield wound. This was something far more sinister. There were the straight, parallel lines of healed lash marks, laid over each other in a brutal crosshatch pattern. There were the small, round, puckered scars of cigarette burns, arranged in a cruel, deliberate design. And down her spine, a series of thick, keloid ridges that spoke of something being repeatedly carved into her skin. But it was the brand that made the blood run cold. On her left shoulder blade, seared into her flesh, was a symbol, a stylized scorpion inside a broken circle. Voss, who had finally regained his composure and was moving towards the action, stopped dead in his tracks. His face went from flushed red to a ghastly, bloodless white. His rifle slipped from his suddenly numb fingers and clattered to the ground. He recognized that brand. He had seen it only once before, in a top-secret intelligence file on Operation Nightfall. It was the personal mark of the enemy's most feared interrogator, a man known only as the Butcher, a man who specialized in breaking the unbreakable. A man the official report claimed Anna's team had never even reached. The gunfire began to die down as base security forces finally cornered the last of the intruders. The chaos subsided, replaced by a stunned, ringing silence. In that silence, everyone stared at Anna's back. They weren't just looking at scars. They were looking at a story of unimaginable pain and unbreakable will. They had called her a coward. They had tried to shame her for having a body that was, they assumed, untouched by the rigors of war. And now they saw the truth. Her skin was a testament, a record of a battle far more brutal than any of them had ever known. It was not a mark of shame. It was a crown of thorns, worn by a hero they had been too blind to see. Anna seemed oblivious to their stares. Her focus was still on the perimeter, her body still coiled, ready for the next threat. She was still in the fight. She hadn't left it for years. The silence was broken by the crunch of boots on gravel. A tall, silver-haired man in a general's uniform, flanked by a squad of heavily armed military police, strode into the courtyard. It was General Matthews, the very man the attackers had been targeting. He ignored the chaos, his eyes locked on one person. He walked directly to Anna, his face a mixture of awe and profound regret. He didn't speak. He simply raised his hand and rendered a slow, perfect salute. Then he turned to the assembled, shell-shocked crowd. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of thunder. For 6 months, this soldier has been subjected to suspicion and scorn, all while carrying a burden none of you could possibly comprehend. He gestured toward the now handcuffed Voss. The report on Operation Nightfall was a lie. A lie told by a coward to cover his own treason. A collective gasp went through the platoon. The mission wasn't compromised by bad intelligence. The general continued, his voice hardening. It was betrayed. Sergeant Voss fed their position to the enemy in exchange for his own life. He is the one who ran. Anna Petrova did not. She was captured, and for 3 months, she was held in a place that makes hell look like a paradise. She was tortured by the butcher himself, but she never broke. She never gave them a single piece of intelligence. He looked back at Anna, his eyes shining with unshed tears. She is not the sole survivor. She is the sole prisoner of war who escaped. She came back, not with stories, but with evidence. The evidence that has just convicted this traitor. He turned his gaze upon the candidates, and the scorn in his eyes could have melted steel. You were tasked with evaluating a soldier. You looked at her, and you saw weakness. You saw a ghost. You were wrong. Heroism isn't about how loud you shout, or how many medals you wear on your chest. It's about what's left when everything is stripped away. He looked at Anna's scarred back, now partially covered as Vance gently draped his own jacket over her shoulders. These are not scars of shame. These are her medals. Each one earned in a battle you pray you never have to face. Voss was dragged away, shouting denials that no one believed. The other candidates stood in stunned, shamed silence, the weight of their cruelty crushing them. Anna finally lowered her rifle. She looked at the general, and for the first time, the ghost in her eyes seemed to recede. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or pain. It was a tear of release. The war, her private, lonely war, was finally over. What do you think of Anna's journey? Sometimes the deepest scars are the ones that forge the greatest strength. Comment, respect, if you believe true heroes are defined by their resilience, not their reputation. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.